The letter came on a Tuesday. Miles Carver found it wedged between a stack of overdue bills and a notice from the RV park management threatening eviction if he did not pay the $340 he owed for the past 2 months. The envelope was thick cream paper, the kind that costs more than it should, with a return address printed in raised black letters, Hastings and Brennan Attorneys at Law, Bedford, Pennsylvania. He opened it, standing in the narrow galley of his 1987 Winnebago Brave, the same RV he had been living in for the past 4 years, parked in the back corner of the Clearview Mobile Home Park off Route 11 outside Scranton. The floor was uneven. The refrigerator door did not close all the way. The bathroom sink had been dripping for 8 months, and he had stopped hearing it. The letter was short. Dear Mr. Carver, we regret to inform you of the passing of Mr. Franklin James Carver on November 3rd, 2024. As the sole living heir, you are named as the primary beneficiary in Mr. Carver's last will and testament. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to arrange a meeting regarding the estate. Sincerely, Edward Hastings, Esquire. Miles read it twice. Then he set it on the fold-down table beside the empty whiskey bottle he had finished the night before, and he sat down on the bench seat that doubled as his bed, and he did not move for a very long time. Franklin Carver. Frank, his father. Miles had not spoken to his father in 22 years. He had not seen him in 24. He had not thought about him, or at least had not allowed himself to think about him in any deliberate way in longer than that. And now the man was dead, and Miles felt nothing except the dull, familiar weight that had lived in his chest since the day Conrail had handed him his severance check and told him his position had been eliminated due to restructuring. That had been 6 years ago. Miles Carver was 62 years old. He had worked for the railroad for 34 years. He had started as a track maintenance laborer in 1984, the summer he turned 20, and had worked his way up to senior civil engineer by the time the company decided it did not need senior civil engineers anymore. They had given him 16 months of severance and a handshake and a coffee mug with the Conrail logo on it that he had left on the break room table on his way out. He had not worked since. He told himself he was looking. He told himself the market was tight for men his age, that the industry had changed, that everything was computerized now, and they wanted young people who knew software, not men who knew how to read the grain of a wooden tie or dare judge the camber of a curve by eye. He told himself a lot of things. What he did not tell himself was that he had stopped trying after the first year, and that he had started drinking more after the second, and that by the third year he had sold his truck and moved into the RV because he could not afford the rent on the apartment anymore, and the RV had been paid off since 1999. The whiskey helped. It did not fix anything, but it made the not fixing easier to live with. He looked at the letter again. Sole living heir. Miles had a daughter, Sarah. She was 20 years old. She had been 12 when he and her mother divorced, and she had been 17 the last time she spoke to him, the night she called to tell him she was getting married and wanted him to walk her down the aisle. He had said yes. He had meant it. But the wedding had been in Pittsburgh on a Saturday in June, and Miles had been in Atlantic City that weekend with money he did not have, chasing a poker hand. He should have folded, and he had told himself he would leave in time to make the ceremony. He had told himself that right up until the moment he was too drunk to drive and too broke to take a gate and too ashamed to call. Sarah had not called him since. He had tried calling her. Once a month for the first year, then once every few months, then once at Christmas, and finally not at all because the number had been disconnected, and he did not know how else to reach her. He did not know if she had gotten married. He did not know if she had children. He did not know where she lived or what she did or whether she ever thought about him the way he thought about her every single day in the small, bitter hours before dawn when the whiskey wore off and he was alone in the dark with nothing but the sound of his own breathing. Sole living heir. The lawyer had not mentioned Sarah. That meant Frank had not known about her or had not cared or had decided that Miles was the only one worth remembering. Miles did not know which possibility was worse. He picked up his phone. It was an old flip phone, the kind they did not make anymore, with a cracked screen and a battery that lasted half a day if he was lucky. He dialed the number on the letterhead. A woman answered on the second ring. Professional voice, efficient, the kind of voice that did not waste time. Hastings and Brennan, how may I direct your call? Edward Hastings, please. My name is Miles Carver. I received a letter. One moment. The hold music was Vivaldi. Miles waited. He looked out the narrow window of the RV at the line of other RVs and trailers parked in neat rows under the gray November sky. A man in a canvas jacket was walking a small dog on a leash. A woman was hanging laundry on a line strung between two lawn chairs. Somewhere a radio was playing country music, the old kind, before it all started sounding the same. The music cut off. "Mr. Carver." The voice was male, older, measured. "Thank you for calling. I am very sorry for your loss. I didn't know he was sick." He wasn't. It was a heart attack. He was found in his home by a neighbor. The coroner said it was quick. Miles said nothing. Hastings continued. "Your father's estate is relatively straightforward. There are no debts, no outstanding liabilities. The primary asset is a property located in Penn Forest Township, roughly 40 miles north of Bedford. It is listed in the county records as the former Whitlock Junction Station Depot, Pennsylvania Railroad, abandoned in 1958. Miles felt something shift behind his ribs. A train station. His father had left him a train station. What's it worth? The land is approximately 3.2 acres. The building itself is in a state of significant disrepair. However, the property is located in an area currently undergoing development interest. We have already received an unsolicited offer from a local developer, Mr. Thomas Richter, for $850,000. $850,000. Miles closed his eyes. There is, however, a condition. Of course there was. Your father's will stipulates that in order to inherit the property, you must reside at the Whitlock Junction Depot and operate it as a functioning station for a period of no less than 12 consecutive months, beginning no later than 30 days from the date of his death. If you fail to meet this condition, the property will be transferred in full to the Pennsylvania Heritage Preservation Fund, a nonprofit organization managed by the Penn Forest Township Council. Miles opened his eyes. Operated as a functioning station. The railroad hasn't run through there in 60 years. That is correct. The tracks were removed in 1961. The will does not specify the exact nature of the operation, only that you must, and I am quoting here, live on the premises and fulfill the duties of a station agent as your father understood them. The language is somewhat vague, which is why I wanted to speak with you directly. If you choose to accept the terms, we will need to establish a clear interpretation that satisfies the probate court. And if I don't accept, then the property transfers to the preservation fund immediately, and you receive nothing." Miles looked at the empty whiskey bottle on the table. $850,000. His father, a man he had not spoken to in 2 decades, leaving him a building in the middle of nowhere with a condition that sounded like something out of a bad joke. "Why," Miles said, "why would he do this?" Hastings paused. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, more careful. "Your father came to my office 6 months ago to draft this will. He had just been diagnosed with congestive heart failure. The doctor gave him a year at most. I asked him why he wanted to include the condition. He said, and again I am quoting, because it is the only thing I have left to give him and because he needs to know what it means to keep a promise." Miles felt the words land like a fist to the sternum. "There is one more thing," Hastings said. "Your father left a package for you, a cassette tape and a journal. He instructed me to give them to you only if you agreed to meet the terms of the will. If you would like to come to Bedford, we can discuss the details in person. I have office hours tomorrow morning, or I can arrange an appointment at your convenience." Miles looked around the RV, the stained carpet, the broken blinds, the smell of old grease and mildew that never quite went away no matter how many times he scrubbed the walls, the eviction notice, the $63 in his checking account, the fact that he had nowhere else to go. "I'll be there tomorrow," he said. 10 o'clock. "I will see you then, Mr. Carver." The line went dead. Miles set the phone down. He sat very still. Then he stood up, pulled on his jacket, and walked out of the RV and across the gravel lot to the small cinder block building that served as the park office. The manager was a man named Ron, 50s, bald, with a gut that hung over his belt and a cigar that never seemed to leave his mouth. "I need to pay what I owe," Miles said. Ron looked at him over the top of his reading glasses. "You got $340, son." "I will by the end of the week." Ron leaned back in his chair. "That's what you said last month." "I know, but I mean it this time." Ron studied him for a long moment. Then he shrugged. "End of the week, Carver. Or I'm towing the Winnie and you can sleep in your car. Except you don't have a car." "End of the week." Miles walked back to the RV. He went inside, closed the door, and sat down at the fold-down table. He looked at the letter from the lawyer. He looked at the empty whiskey bottle. His father, a man he had hated for as long as he could remember, leaving him a train station in the middle of nowhere, with a condition that meant he would have to live there for a year. And the fact that he had nowhere else to go. The drive to Bedford took 3 hours. Miles left before dawn on Wednesday morning, driving the RV east on Route 22, through the long, empty stretches of central Pennsylvania, where the highway cut through hills covered in bare November trees, and the sky was the color of old steel. He stopped once for gas and coffee at a truck stop outside Altoona and paid for both with the last $20 bill in his wallet. The coffee was bad. He drank it anyway. Bedford was a small town, the kind of place that looked like it had been built in 1890 and had stopped changing sometime around 1965. The main street had a hardware store, a diner, a pharmacy, and a bank with a brick facade and a clock tower that had stopped working years ago. The law office of Hastings and Brennan was in a 2-story building next to the post office with a black sign in gold letters and a narrow staircase that led to the second floor. Edward Hastings was 70 if he was a day. White hair, wire-rimmed glasses, a navy suit that had been tailored in a decade when tailoring still mattered. He shook Miles' hand with a firm grip and gestured to a leather chair in front of a desk covered in neat stacks of paper. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Carver. Can I offer you coffee?" "No, thank you." Hastings sat down behind the desk and folded his hands. "I have the documents here. Before we proceed, I want to make sure you understand the terms. The condition is binding. If you do not fulfill the 12-month residency and operation requirement, you forfeit all claim to the property. There is no provision for partial credit, no allowance for extenuating circumstances. The language is very clear." "I understand." "There is also the matter of Mr. Richter's offer. He has made it known that he intends to develop the land into a resort and casino complex. The Township Council is divided on the issue. Some members support the development for the tax revenue. Others, including Councilwoman Dorothea Mercer, are opposed. She runs the preservation fund that would receive the property if you fail to meet the terms. She believes the depot should be preserved as a historical site. What do you believe?" Hastings smiled faintly. "I believe your father knew exactly what he was doing when he wrote this will. He was not a sentimental man, Mr. Carver, but he was a deliberate one." He opened a drawer and pulled out a small cardboard box. Inside was a cassette tape in a clear plastic case and a leather-bound journal, the kind with a strap that buckled across the front. The journal was old, the leather cracked and faded to a dull brown. "Your father asked me to give you these if you agreed to the terms. I have not listened to the tape, and I have not read the journal. He said they were for you alone." Miles took the box. The journal was heavier than it looked. He could see the edges of pages inside yellowed with age, covered in small, tight handwriting. "There is one more thing," Hastings said. He pulled a set of keys from the desk drawer and slid them across the desk. "These are for the depot, the front door, the freight room, and the ticket booth. Your father had the locks changed 2 years ago. He said he wanted to make sure the place was secure." Miles picked up the keys. They were cold in his hand. "When do I need to start?" "The clock begins the day you take residence. You have until December 3rd to move in. After that, the 30-day window expires and the condition is void." Miles nodded. He stood up, tucked the box under his arm, and shook Hastings' hand again. "One last question," Miles said. "Did my father ever talk about me?" Hastings looked at him for a long moment. "Once, he said you were the best engineer Conrail ever had, and that he wished he had told you that when it mattered." Miles felt something crack open inside his chest. He did not trust himself to speak, so he nodded and walked out of the office and down the narrow stairs to the street. He sat in the RV for a long time before he started the engine. The road to Whitlock Junction was not on any map Miles could find. He drove north out of Bedford on Route 56, following the directions Hastings had written on a slip of paper, through a landscape of low hills and narrow valleys, where the hardwood trees stood bare against the November sky and the creeks ran fast and cold over beds of gray stone. The pavement gave way to gravel after 10 miles, and the gravel gave way to dirt after another 5, and finally the road ended at a small clearing where the forest opened up and the rusted remnants of an old rail bed cut a straight line through the trees. The depot stood at the far end of the clearing. Miles turned off the engine and sat very still. The building was long and low, dark red, board and batten siding faded to the color of dried clay, with a peaked roof and a wide overhanging eave that ran the length of the platform side. The roof over the freight room had partly caved in. The windows on the waiting room side were boarded over with weathered plywood. The platform was still there, made of gray wood greened with moss, and above the bay window at the front of the building, painted in faded white letters on a dark green board, was the sign Whitlock JCT, Pen RR. Beyond the platform, the rail bed stretched away into the trees, a long, straight scar where the tracks had been pulled up 60 years ago. The ballast was still visible in patches where the leaves had not yet covered it. The silence was total. Miles got out of the RV. The air was cold and sharp and smelled like wet leaves and wood smoke and something older, something that had been there long before the railroad and would be there long after. He walked slowly across the clearing, his boots crunching on gravel, and climbed the 3 wooden steps to the platform. The boards creaked under his weight. He stood in front of the waiting room door. It was painted green, the paint peeling in long strips with a rusted padlock hanging from a hasp. He pulled out the keys Hastings had given him and tried the first one. It did not fit. He tried the second. The lock turned with a grinding metallic sound, and the hasp fell away, and the door swung open on hinges that screamed like wounded animals. Miles stepped inside. The waiting room was a single long space with a slate floor scuffed, soft by decades of feet, dark wainscoted walls, and a wooden bench running along one wall. A black pot-bellied stove stood in the corner, its chimney pipe rising through the ceiling. At the far end of the room, beneath the bay window, was the closed wooden door of the ticket booth. The air smelled like cold cinder and old paper, and the faint, sweet smell of pine boards. Miles walked the length of the room slowly. He put his hand on the cold iron of the pot-bellied stove. He put his hand on the wooden bench. His father had stood in this same room, breathing this same air, touching these same walls. The fact that he had not known his father lived here. He had not known his father was alive until 3 days ago when the letter came. And now the man was dead, and Miles was standing in the place he had called home, and Miles did not know what he was supposed to feel. He walked to the ticket booth door and turned the brass knob. The door swung open. The booth was small, maybe 6 feet square. A high wooden desk faced the bay window. A tall wooden stool stood behind the desk. A row of pigeonholes was built into the wall above the desk, and a small iron safe with a combination dial sat on the floor in the corner. A chalkboard was mounted to the wall. The last entry still ghosted in faint white chalk, 6:42 p.m. eastbound. Final. On the desk in the center was an old cassette player, the kind with the large rectangular buttons, and beside it a note written in careful block letters on a piece of lined paper. Miles, play this first. Frank. Miles sat down on the wooden stool. He looked out through the bay window at the empty rail bed, at the trees beyond, at the gray sky pressing down on everything. Walking out, getting back in the RV and driving away and calling Hastings and telling him to give the property to the preservation fund and the $850,000 to someone who needed it more. He considered that for a long time. Then he reached out and pressed play. The tape hissed for a moment. Then his father's voice filled the small booth, low and rough and worn down by years of cigarettes and regret. Miles, if you are listening to this, then I am dead, and you are sitting in the ticket booth at Whitlock Junction, and you have agreed to the terms of the will. I do not know if you agreed because you need the money, or because you are curious, or because some part of you wants to understand why I left. It does not matter. You are here now. That is enough. I know you hate me. I have known that for a long time. I do not blame you. I was not a good father. I was not a good husband. I was not a good man. I made choices that hurt people, and the person I hurt the most was you. I cannot take those choices back. I cannot make you forgive me. I am not asking you to. What I am asking is that you listen. This station has been my home for 66 years. I came here in 1958 as a brakeman on the Pennsylvania Railroad's Bedford branch. I was 24 years old. I had been working the rails for 6 years, and I thought I knew everything there was to know about trains and tracks and the way the world worked. I was wrong. On the morning of June 14th, 1958, there was an accident, a freight derailment just south of Whitlock Junction. 3 men died. The railroad said it was my fault. They said I had been drinking on the pub and that I had failed to set the brakes properly on a loaded hopper car, and that the car had rolled downhill and jumped the track and taken 2 other cars with it. They fired me the same day. They blacklisted me from every railroad in the state. They were right about one thing. I had been drinking. I drank every day back then. I drank because your mother had just left me and taken you with her, and I did not know how to live with the fact that I had driven her away. I drank because it was easier than looking at what I had become. But I did not cause that accident, Miles. The derailment was caused by a faulty brake shoe on the lead car. The railroad knew it. They had an internal inspection report that proved it. But they buried the report because it was cheaper to blame a drunk brakeman than to admit they had been running cars with defective equipment. They needed a scapegoat, and I was the easiest target. I could have fought it. I had friends who would have testified. I had evidence. But the other two men on my crew that morning, Marcus Hayes and Tommy Dolan, they had families. They had kids. If the railroad had gone after the crew instead of just me, they would have lost everything. So I took the blame. I signed the papers. I let them destroy me so that Marcus and Tommy could keep their jobs. And then I came here. I came to Whitlock Junction because it was the only place I knew and because the station agent at the time, a man named Harlan Boyer, offered me a place to stay. Not an official job. The railroad had already closed the line. But Harlan was still living here, still keeping the place running, even though no trains came through anymore. He said a station does not stop being a station just because the trains stop coming. He said it was about keeping the door open for whoever might need it next. I stayed. Harlan taught me how to keep the books, how to tend the stove, how to make coffee the way the old-timers liked it. He died in 1963, and before he passed, he showed me something. He took me to the ticket booth, and he pried up the floorboards beneath the stool. There was a compartment there. Inside was a lockbox and a letter. Money he had saved. Money he left for whoever came next. For me. He said a station is a promise that gets passed down. He said I was to use it to keep the place alive. And when my time came, I was to pass it on to whoever needed it most. I have been here ever since. 66 years. I have kept the door unlocked. I have kept the stove lit in the winter. I have kept the coffee hot for anyone who walked down the old rail bed looking for shelter or warmth or just a place to sit for a while. I have done this because Harlan taught me that keeping a station is not about the trains. It is about being the kind of man who keeps his promises even when no one is watching. I failed you, Miles. I know that. I was not there when you needed me. I was not the father you deserved. I cannot change that. But I can give you this place, and I can give you a chance to do what I could not do. You are going to want to sell it. You are going to want to take the money and walk away. I do not blame you. But I am asking you to stay. I am asking you to live here for 1 year and to see what happens when you keep a door open for people who need it. There is a journal on the desk. I have been writing in it since 1958. It is 66 years of days and nights in this place. Read it. You will understand. And there is something else. Something Harlan left. Look beneath the stool. The same place he showed me. It is yours now. Use it the way it was meant to be used. I loved you, Miles. I never stopped. I just did not know how to show it. The station is yours now. Do not let it die the way I did. Goodbye, son. The tape hissed into silence. Miles sat very still on the wooden stool. He looked out through the bay window at the empty rail bed. His father's voice, the way it sounded older and smaller, then he remembered the way it cracked on the word son. The accident in 1958. The fact that his father had taken the blame for something he did not do and had spent the rest of his life in this place because of it. The fact that he had never known any of this. Miles stood up slowly. He looked down at the floor beneath the stool. The floorboards in the ticket booth were old pine, the same as the rest of the building, but the boards directly beneath the stool were a slightly different color than the surrounding boards. Darker, as if they had been replaced at some point and had aged differently. Miles knelt down and ran his fingertips along the seam where the darker boards met the lighter ones. He felt a gap, a deliberate gap, smooth cut, the kind of gap that does not happen by accident. He went back out to the freight room and found a piece of flat iron that might once have been part of a switch lever, and he came back and used it to pry up the edge of the dark boards. They came up together in a small section, about 18 inches square, hinged on leather straps, that had hardened with age but had not broken. Underneath was a small wooden compartment fitted into the floor joists. Inside the compartment, lying on a piece of old oilcloth, was a tin lockbox and a sealed envelope. Miles lifted them out yen one at a time. The tin lockbox was heavy, the kind of small, fireproof box a station agent might have used to keep the day's cash before the night train. The envelope was thick paper, the ink on the front faded brown, addressed in a careful slanted hand that was not his father's. To whoever finds this, Harlan Boyer, June 17, 1958. Miles opened the lockbox first. Inside in neat rows were bundled banknotes, old-style United States currency from the 1930s, 1940s, and 1950s, 20s and 50s, and a small stack of hundreds held together with paper bands that crumbled at the edges when he touched them. He counted slowly. The total was $9,320. Beneath the bills was a railroad pocket watch, a Hamilton 992B in a silver hunting case, the standard timepiece of every Pennsylvania railroad agent and conductor, identical to the kind his father must have carried. Miles set the money carefully aside and opened Harlan's envelope. The letter was written on heavy cream paper, the ink brown with age, but the handwriting clear and careful. To whoever finds this, my name is Harlan Boyer. I have been the station agent at Whitlock Junction on the Bedford branch of the Pennsylvania Railroad from 1932 until today, June 17, 1958. The branch line is being closed at the end of this week. The last passenger train will run Friday evening. After that, the rails will be pulled and the building will be locked, and there will be no reason for anyone to come here again. I am 64 years old and I have no children. My wife Eleanor passed in the influenza spring of 1949. I have spent my life at this small junction, watching trains come in from Bedford in the morning and go out toward Pittsburgh at night. I have known every regular passenger by name. I have made a pot of coffee every morning at 5 o'clock for the brakemen on the through freights, even though it was not part of my duties. I considered it my duty anyway. Coffee is a small kindness, and a small kindness on a cold morning is sometimes the difference between a good day and a hard one. I have saved a portion of every paycheck I ever drew in this lockbox beneath the floor of the booth where I have sat for 26 years. I do not trust banks. I lost what little I had in the failure of the Bedford Trust in 1933, and I have nowhere else to put what I have saved. If you are reading this letter, you came into this depot after I am gone, maybe long after. Maybe the building has been forgotten. Maybe you came looking for shelter or quiet or a place to begin again. Whatever brought you here, I want you to know that the depot has been waiting for you. A small station is a kind of patient thing. It waits for the train, and then it waits for the next train, and then eventually, when there are no more trains, it waits for whoever will come next. I have been the one waiting at Whitlock Junction since 1932. I am leaving the waiting to you now. Take what is in this box. It is for you. Use it to keep this place alive. That is all I ask. Be kind to the building. The coffee tastes better here than anywhere on the division. I do not know why, and I have stopped trying to find out. Harlan Boyer Station, Agent Whitlock Junction, June 17, 1958. Miles read the letter twice. Then he folded it carefully along its old creases and placed it back in its envelope. He sat very still on the floor of the ticket booth with Harlan's letter in one hand and the lockbox in the other, and $9,320 that had been waiting here for 66 years for whoever would come next. His father had found it, and his father had left it for him. 2 men, 2 generations, 2 promises kept. Miles understood now. The inheritance was not just the building, it was the money to fix it, the promise to keep it, the responsibility to pass it on. He reached out and picked up his father's journal from the desk. The leather was soft and worn, the pages thick and rough-edged. He unbuckled the strap and opened it to the first page. The handwriting was small and precise. The ink faded to brown. June 17, 1958. First day at Whitlock Junction. Harlan says a station is a promise. I do not know what that means yet, but I am going to find out. Miles turned the page. June 18, 1958. Learned how to fire the stove. Harlan says the trick is to let the air in slow. Too much and the fire dies. Not enough and it smolders. He says it is like most things in life. You have to find the balance. Miles kept reading. The entries were short at first, a few lines a day, observations about the weather, about repairs to the building, about the occasional hiker or hunter who stopped by for coffee. But as the years went on, the entries grew longer, more reflective. His father wrote about loneliness, about regret, about the men who had died in the accident and the families he had never been able to face. About Miles. About the letters he had written and never sent. About the phone calls he had made that had gone unanswered. Miles read until the light outside the bay window began to fade. He read about the day his mother died in 1987 and how his father had driven to the funeral, but had not gone inside because he did not think Miles would want him there. He read about the day Sarah was born and how his father had stood outside the hospital in the rain for 3 hours, hoping for a glimpse of his granddaughter until Miles came out and told him to leave and never come back. He read the entry from that day. September 12, 2003. Went to Scranton. Saw my granddaughter through the window. Red hair like her grandmother. Miles came out and said I was not welcome. He said I had no right to be there. He was right. I left. I will not go back. But I will remember her face. Miles closed the journal. He set it down on the desk beside the cassette player and Harlan's letter. He stood up and walked out of the ticket booth and through the waiting room and out onto the platform. The sky was dark now, the first stars beginning to appear between the bare branches of the trees. The air was colder. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn sounded faint and mournful from a line that still ran from a world that still moved forward while this place stood still. Miles sat down on the edge of the platform. His father, a man who had spent 66 years in this place, waiting for trains that would never come, keeping a door open for people who might never walk through it. The fact that he had hated his father for so long that the hate had become a kind of habit, a thing he carried without thinking like the weight of his own body. Maybe, just maybe, he had been wrong. He pulled out his phone. The battery was at 12%. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he had not called in 3 years. Sarah. He stared at it for a long time. Then he pressed call. It rang once, twice, 3 times. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. Please check the number and try again. Miles closed his eyes. He sat there on the platform for a long time, listening to the silence, listening to the wind moving through the bare trees, listening to the sound of his own breathing. Finally, he stood up. He walked back to the RV and pulled out the 2 duffel bags that held everything he owned. He carried them into the waiting room and set them on the wooden bench. Then he went back out to the RV and drove it around to the side of the depot where it would be out of sight from the road. When he came back inside, he locked the door behind him. The station was his now. He did not know what that meant yet, but he was going to find out. The first night was the coldest Miles Carver had ever known. He woke at 3 in the morning on the wooden bench in the waiting room, his body curled tight against the chill, his breath visible in the darkness. The wool blanket he had pulled from the RV was not enough. The pot-bellied stove in the corner had gone cold hours ago, and he had not yet figured out how to keep it burning through the night the way his father's journal said Harlan Boyer had taught him to do in 1958. Let the air in slow. Too much and the fire dies. Not enough and it smolders. Miles got up and walked to the stove in the dark. His knees ached. His back ached. Everything ached. He knelt down and opened the iron door and looked inside at the heap of gray ash and the faint orange glow of a single ember buried deep beneath it. He had no kindling. He had no newspaper. He had nothing but the memory of camping trips he had taken with Sarah when she was 8 years old before the divorce, before everything fell apart, when he had still been the kind of father who knew how to build a fire and tell stories and make his daughter laugh. Those trips now, the way Sarah had watched him stack the wood in a careful pyramid, the way she had clapped when the flames caught, the way she had fallen asleep in her sleeping bag with her small hand resting on his arm. The fact that he could not remember the last time she had touched him. Miles went outside. The air was sharp and clear, and the sky was full of stars, more stars than he had seen in years, the kind of sky that only existed in places where no city lights could reach. He walked to the edge of the clearing and gathered an armful of dry sticks and dead leaves, and he carried them back inside and fed them carefully into the stove, blowing gently on the ember until it caught and the kindling began to burn. The fire grew. He added larger sticks, then split logs from the small pile he had found stacked against the back wall of the freight room. The warmth began to spread. He sat on the floor in front of the stove and held his hands out to the heat and watched the flames through the small iron grate. His father doing the same thing. Every night for 66 years, alone. Miles did not go back to sleep. He sat by the stove until dawn, feeding it piece by piece, learning the rhythm of it, learning how much air to give and how much to hold back. When the light began to filter through the cracks in the boarded windows, he stood up and walked to the ticket booth. The journal was still on the desk where he had left it. He opened it to a random page near the middle. March 4th, 1971. Heavy snow last night. The roof over the freight room is starting to sag. I will need to reinforce it before next winter. A man came by this afternoon, said he was a historian from the university in Pittsburgh, wanted to know about the old line. I made him coffee and we talked for 2 hours. He said places like this are disappearing. I told him that is what places do. They disappear unless someone decides to keep them. Miles turned the page. March 5th, 1971. Thought about what the historian said. Decided he was wrong. Places do not disappear. People let them go. There is a difference. Miles closed the journal. He looked out through the bay window at the rail bed, at the wang straight line of it disappearing into the trees. The morning sun was just beginning to touch the tops of the ridge, and the light was pale and cold. His father writing those words. People let them go. The fact that his father had not let this place go. Not for 66 years. Not even when there was no reason left to stay except the promise he had made to a man named Harlan Boyer, who had believed that a station was more than just a building. Miles stood up. He walked out of the ticket booth and through the waiting room and out onto the platform. The sagging roof over the freight room, the boarded windows, the peeling paint and the rotted boards and the 50 years of neglect that had crept in after his father had grown too old to fight it back. If he was going to stay here for a year, he was not going to live in a ruin. The hardware store in Bedford was called Dunlap's, and it had been in the same building on Main Street since 1947. The man behind the counter was in his 70s with a face like worn leather and hands that looked like they had built half the county. Help you, he said. I need materials to fix a roof, Miles said, and tools. I don't have any tools. The man looked at him for a long moment. You the one who inherited the Whitlock Depot? Miles hesitated. How did you know? Ed Hastings told me. Also, it's a small town. News travels. You planning to fix it up or sell it? I don't know yet. The man nodded. Fair enough. What's wrong with the roof? The freight room side is sagging. Looks like water damage. Some of the rafters are rotted through. You know how to frame a roof? No. You know how to swing a hammer? I can learn. The man smiled for the first time. That's the right answer. Come on, I'll get you set up. His name was Augie Klein. He had been a carpenter for 50 years before he retired and bought the hardware store from his brother-in-law. He walked Miles through the aisles, pulling items off the shelves and setting them on the counter. A claw hammer, a handsaw, a framing square, a box of galvanized nails, a pry bar, a level, cedar shingles, roofing tar, 2x6s for the rafters. You are going to need help, Augie said. That roof is a two-man job at least. I'll manage. Augie looked at him. You ever done anything like this before? I was a civil engineer. I built bridges. Bridges are not roofs. I know, but I can read a manual. Augie laughed. It was a good sound, rough and genuine. All right, but if you fall off and break your neck, don't come crying to me. He rang up the materials. The total came to $473. Miles pulled out his debit card and hoped the account had enough to cover it. The card reader beeped. Approved. You need this delivered, Augie asked. I've got an RV. I can haul it. The depot's got no power, right? No water. Not yet. You are going to freeze your ass off out there. I've been cold before. Augie studied him for a moment. Then he reached under the counter and pulled out a business card. That's my number. You need help, you call. I don't have much to do these days except sit around and wait for customers who don't come. Might as well make myself useful. Miles took the card. Why would you help me? Because your father helped me once. Long time ago. I had a job go bad, lost my truck, lost my tools, almost lost my house. Frank gave me a place to stay for 3 months until I got back on my feet. Never asked for a dime. So yeah, I'll help you. It's what he would have done. Miles did not know what to say to that, so he nodded and carried the materials out to the RV and drove back to Whitlock Junction. The work was harder than he expected. Miles started with the freight room roof. He climbed up on a ladder he had found in the back of the building and pulled away the rotted shingles and the tar paper underneath. The rafters were worse than anticipated. 3 of them had split clean through and 2 more were soft with rot. He would have to replace them all. He spent the first day just tearing out the old wood, prying it loose with the crowbar, letting it crash to the ground below. His hands blistered. His shoulders burned. By the time the sun went down, he had cleared less than a quarter of the damaged section, and he was so tired he could barely lift his arms. He heated a can of soup on the pot-bellied stove and ate it sitting on the wooden bench in the waiting room. Then he lay down and pulled the blanket over himself and fell asleep before the fire had even begun to die. He dreamed about Sarah. She was 8 years old again, sitting beside him on the tailgate of his old truck, her legs swinging in the air, her small hand holding a fishing pole. She was laughing. He could not remember what she was laughing about, but the sound of it filled his chest with something sharp and sweet and unbearable. When he woke up, it was still dark and the dream was gone, and all that was left was the ache. The second day, Augie Klein showed up. Miles heard the truck before he saw it, the low rumble of an old Ford engine coming up the dirt road. He climbed down from the ladder and watched as Augie pulled into the clearing and got out carrying a toolbox in one hand and a thermos in the other. "Figured you could use some coffee," Augie said. "I don't have any cups." Augie pulled 2 tin camping mugs from his jacket pocket. "I came prepared." They sat on the platform and drank the coffee and looked out at the rail bed. It was a clear morning, cold and still, and the sunlight slanted through the trees in long, pale shafts. "Your father used to sit right here," Augie said. "Every morning, 5:30 like clockwork. He'd have his coffee and watch the light come up over the ridge. Said it was the best part of the day." Miles said nothing. "You look like him," Augie said. "Same build, same way of holding yourself. Like you are carrying something heavy and trying not to show it." "He told you about me." "Some, not much. Frank wasn't a talker, but I knew he had a son. I knew you hadn't spoken in a long time. I knew it ate at him." Miles looked down at the coffee in his hands. "Did he ever say why?" "No, but I got the sense it was not all on you." They drank in silence for a while. Then Augie set his mug down and stood up. "All right, let's see this roof." Augie climbed the ladder and then looked at the damage and let out a low whistle. "You weren't kidding. This is bad. Can it be fixed?" "Anything can be fixed if you are willing to put in the work. Come on, I'll show you how to sister a rafter." They worked together for the rest of the morning. Augie showed Miles how to cut the new 2x6s to length, how to fit them alongside the old rotted rafters and bolt them in place, how to check for level and plumb and square. Miles followed his instructions carefully, measuring twice, cutting once, trying not to make mistakes. By noon, they had replaced 2 rafters. It was slow work, but it was good work, the kind where you could see the progress with your own eyes. Augie left after lunch. He said he had to get back to the store, but Miles suspected he just wanted to give him space. Before he drove away, he leaned out the window of the truck and said, "You are doing fine. Keep at it. I'll come back Saturday if you need me." "You don't have to." "I know, but I'm going to anyway." Miles watched the truck disappear down the dirt road. Then he climbed back up the ladder and kept working. By the end of the first week, the roof was half done. Miles worked every day from dawn until dark, tearing out the old wood, fitting in the new nailing down the cedar shingles 1 row at a time. His hands were raw. His back screamed every time he bent over, but the roof was taking shape. He learned the rhythm of the work, the way the hammer felt in his hand, the way the nails sank into the wood with a satisfying thunk, the way the shingles overlapped in neat rows, each one covering the seam of the one below, the way water would run off them when the rain came. His father doing this same work, 40 years ago maybe, 50, keeping the building alive, keeping the promise. On Friday afternoon, a truck pulled into the clearing. It was not Augie's truck. This one was newer, a black Silverado with chrome wheels and tinted windows. A man got out. He was in his 40s, tall and lean, wearing a suit that looked expensive and out of place in the middle of the woods. "Miles Carver," the man said. "That's me." The man walked over and extended his hand. "Thomas Richter. I'm the developer who made the offer on this property. I wanted to introduce myself." Miles did not shake his hand. "I'm not selling." Richter smiled. It did not reach his eyes. "I understand you have a condition to fulfill." Ed Hastings explained the terms of the will. "I respect that, but I wanted to let you know that my offer stands. 850,000. And if you change your mind at any point during the year, I'm prepared to increase it to 900,000. Immediate closing." I'm not interested. Mr. Carver, I don't think you understand what you are turning down. This property is worth a fraction of what I'm offering. The building is falling apart. The land is in the middle of nowhere. There is no infrastructure, no utilities, no road access beyond a dirt trail. You could take the money and start over somewhere else. Somewhere with heat and running water and a future. Miles looked at him. Why do you want it so badly? Richter's smile faded. Because I see potential where other people see ruin. That's what I do. I build things. I create value. This land could support a resort and casino complex that would bring juice and revenue to this township. It would be good for everyone, except the people who want it to stay the way it is. People like Dorothea Mercer, you mean? The councilwoman who runs the preservation fund. Richter's voice took on an edge. She's a romantic. She thinks preserving the past is more important than building the future. But the past is dead, Mr. Carver. It doesn't pay taxes. It doesn't employ people. It just sits here and rots. Miles felt something cold settle behind his ribs. Is that what you think my father was doing, sitting here and rotting? Richter held his gaze. I think your father was a man who made a mistake 60 years ago and spent the rest of his life hiding from it. And I think you have a chance to do something different. Take the money, move on, don't make the same mistake he did. Miles turned and walked back to the ladder. Get off my property. Richter stood there for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. He set it on the platform railing. When you change your mind, call me. The offer expires at the end of the year. After that, I'll find another way to get what I want. He got back in his truck and drove away. Miles picked up the business card. He looked at it for a long time. Then he tore it in half and dropped the pieces on the ground. On Saturday, Augie came back with another man. His name was Marcus Hayes. He was 78 years old with white hair and a face carved by wind and time, and the kind of life that leaves marks you can see. He walked with a limp favoring his left leg, and when he shook Miles's hand, his grip was strong, but careful, the grip of a man who had broken too many bones over the years and knew how to protect what was left. Marcus worked with your father, Augie said. Back in the 50s, I thought you might want to meet him. Miles looked at Marcus. You were on the crew the day of the accident. Marcus nodded. Shamal, I was. Your father saved my life that day. He took the blame so I could keep my job, so I could keep feeding my kids. I owed him everything, and I never got the chance to pay him back. So I'm here now, if you'll have me. Miles felt something crack open behind his sternum. Did you know he was innocent? I knew. We all knew. The brake shoe was faulty. The railroad knew it too. But they needed someone to blame, and Frank was the easiest target. He had been drinking. That much was true. But the drinking didn't cause the accident. The railroad did. Why didn't you speak up? Marcus looked away. Because I was a coward. Because I had 3 kids and a mortgage, and I was scared of losing everything. Frank told me to keep my mouth shut. He said he would take care of it. And he did. He took the fall so we wouldn't have to. He turned back to Miles. I tried to find him after I retired. I wanted to tell him I was sorry. I wanted to tell him he was a better man than I ever was, but he didn't want to be found. He stayed here, alone for 66 years, and I let him. Miles said nothing. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a small metal box. I brought something for you, papers, documents, the internal inspection report from 1958 that the railroad buried, proof that the brake shoe was defective, proof that your father didn't cause that accident. I kept them all these years because I thought maybe someday they would matter. Maybe they still do. He handed the box to Miles. Your father was innocent. He deserves to have people know that, even if it's too late. Miles took the box. It was heavier than it looked. He opened it. Inside were yellowed papers, carbon copies of inspection reports, handwritten notes, photographs of the derailment site. All the evidence his father could have used to clear his name if he had been willing to fight. But he hadn't fought. He had taken the blame. He had walked away. He had come to this place and never left. Miles closed the box. Why are you telling me this now? Because Thomas Richter came to see me last week, Marcus said. He wanted to know about your father, about the accident. He said he was doing research on the property, but I got the sense he was looking for ammunition, something he could use against you. What did you tell him? Nothing. I don't trust developers, especially ones who smile too much. Marcus paused. But you should know something. Richter's grandfather was a division superintendent for the Pennsylvania Railroad in the 50s. He was one of the men who signed off on burying that inspection report. One of the men who let your father take the fall. Richter knows the history. He knows what his family did. And I think he wants this land because destroying it would erase the last evidence of what happened. Miles felt his jaw tighten. He said the past doesn't matter, that it just sits here and rots. Then he's a fool, Marcus said. The past is the only thing that does matter. It's the only thing that tells us who we are. They worked together for the rest of the day, the three of them finishing the roof. Marcus could not climb the ladder anymore, but he handed up tools and materials, and he told stories about the old days, about the trains that used to run through Whitlock Junction, about the men who rode them, about the way the station had been a gathering place for brakemen and engineers and section hands who needed a cup of coffee and a warm place to sit before the next run. Your father kept that tradition alive, Marcus said. Even after the train stopped coming, he'd make a pot of coffee every morning at 5:30 and leave it on the stove. Anyone who walked by could come in and have a cup. Didn't matter who they were. Hikers, hunters, drifters, kids looking for trouble. Frank didn't judge. He just made the coffee and kept the door open. Miles absorbed that. His father sitting in the ticket booth every morning, watching the empty rail bed, waiting for people who might never come. And the fact that they had come, that Marcus was here now, that Augie was here, that even in the middle of nowhere, in a place the world had forgotten, his father had kept a promise, and people had remembered. By the time the sun went down, the roof was finished. Miles stood on the ladder and looked at the work they had done. The new shingles were clean and straight and tight. The rafters underneath were solid. The building would hold through the winter. Augie and Marcus packed up their tools. Before they left, Marcus pulled Miles aside. Your father left you more than just this building, he said. He left you a chance to finish what he started. Don't waste it. I don't know what he started. Marcus smiled. Yes, you do. You just haven't admitted it yet. They drove away and Miles stood alone in the clearing, watching the taillights disappear into the trees. Then he went inside and sat down at the desk in the ticket booth and opened his father's journal to the last entry. November 1st, 2024. The doctor says I have 6 months. Heart failure. I could go to the hospital, but I won't. I want to die here in this place, where I have lived. I have been thinking about Miles, about the things I should have said and didn't, about the fact that I failed him as a father, but maybe I can still give him something as a man. I am leaving him the station. Not because I think he will keep it, but because I think he needs to understand what it means to make a promise and keep it. Even when it costs you everything, even when no one is watching, even when the world tells you it doesn't matter. A station is a promise, Miles. It is a promise to be there when people need you, to keep the door open, to keep the fire burning, to wait. I waited for you for 66 years. I am still waiting. I hope someday you understand why. Frank Miles closed the journal. He sat very still in the small booth, looking out through the bay window at the darkness beyond. For the first time since the letter had arrived on that Tuesday morning, 2 weeks ago, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of what his father had given him. Not a building, not money, a chance to be the kind of man who keeps his promises, the kind of man who doesn't walk away, the kind of man his father had tried to be and had failed to be and had spent 66 years trying to become. Miles stood up. He walked to the RV and dug through his duffel bag until he found the small plastic box he had been carrying for 6 years, the box he had not opened since the day Conrail handed him his severance check. Inside the box was a photograph. Sarah, age 12, sitting on the steps of their old house in Scranton, holding a sign she had made for Father's on him. The sign said, "Best Dad Ever" in crayon letters. Miles had kept the photograph because it was the last time she had looked at him like he mattered. He looked at it now, at her smile, at the crayon letters, at the way her small hand gripped the edge of the sign like it was the most important thing in the world. And he made a promise. He was going to find her. He was going to tell her he was sorry. He was going to show her that he was trying to be the man she had believed he was when she made that sign. Even if it took a year, even if it took the rest of his life, he was not going to walk away. Not this time. Miles put the photograph back in the box and set it on the desk in the ticket booth beside his father's journal and Harlan's letter. Then he went outside and stood on the platform at the railbed, at the long, straight line of it disappearing into the darkness. Somewhere far away, a train horn sounded. It was faint and distant and full of longing, the sound of something moving forward, something that could not stop, something that had places to be and promises to keep. Miles stood and listened until the sound faded into silence. Then he went inside and locked the door and fed the fire in the pot-bellied stove and lay down on the wooden bench. The station was his now, and he was not going to let it die. The snow came in December. It started as a light dusting on a Tuesday morning, small dry flakes that fell straight down through still air and melted when they touched the ground. By Wednesday, the flakes were larger and wet, clinging to the bare branches of the trees and piling up in the corners of the platform where the wind could not reach them. By Thursday, the snow was falling in thick white curtains that erased the rail bed and the clearing and everything beyond until the world was reduced to the depot and the circle of light from the kerosene lantern Miles had hung above the door. He had prepared as best he could. Augie had helped him stack firewood along the back wall of the freight room cords of split oak and hickory that would burn hot and slow through the long winter nights. Marcus had brought him a cast-iron cook stove, an old beast from the 1940s that Marcus said had belonged to his mother, and together they had fitted it into the corner of the waiting room beside the pot-bellied stove. Miles had learned to cook simple meals on it: eggs and bacon in the morning, soup and bread at night, coffee, always coffee, heating in a blue enamel pot on the back burner. The depot had no electricity, no running water, no insulation beyond the thin board and batten walls. But it had the stoves, and it had the roof he had repaired, and it had the door he kept unlocked because his father's journal had said a station should always be open to whoever might need it. Miles had been living there for 5 weeks. The eviction notice from the RV park had come and gone, unanswered, irrelevant. The RV sat beside the freight room, now covered in snow, frozen solid, a relic of the life he had left behind. He did not miss it. He did not miss anything about the person he had been before the letter came. He woke every morning at 5:30 the way his father had. He made coffee on the cook stove and carried a cup out to the platform and watched the light come up over the ridge. Then he came back in Hod and read a few pages of his father's journal, working his way forward through the years, learning the shape of the man who had lived here, the choices he had made, the regrets he had carried. The journal was not a confession, it was a record. Days and nights, weather and repairs, the occasional visitor, the long stretches of solitude. His father had written about loneliness the way other men wrote about the seasons, as a fact of life, something to be endured and understood, but never quite overcome. January 8th, 1974. No one came by today. No one has come by in 3 weeks. The silence is a kind of companionship after a while. You stop expecting it to break. You stop wanting it to. Miles understood that now. The silence of Whitlock Junction was not empty. It was full. Full of the wind in the trees and the creak of the building settling and the hiss of snow against the windows. Full of the presence of all the years that had passed here, all the people who had stopped and moved on, all the promises made and kept and broken. He had been alone for most of his adult life, but he had never been this kind of alone. This deliberate, this necessary. It was changing him. He could feel it. The way the work of repairing the building had changed his hands, hardening the calluses, strengthening the grip. The way the rhythm of the days had changed his sleep, pulling him into alignment with the sun. The way the journal had changed his understanding of his father, filling in the gaps, showing him the man behind the absence. On Friday morning, the snow stopped. The sky cleared to a hard blue and the temperature dropped to 10 degrees, and the world outside the depot was so white and still, it looked like something out of a dream. Miles bundled up in his father's old Carhartt jacket, the one he had found hanging on a nail in the ticket booth, and he walked out to the edge of the clearing to check the path to the road. The snow was 2 feet deep. It would take hours to shovel. He had no shovel. He turned to go back inside, and that was when he saw the woman standing on the platform. She was in her 50s, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a long wool coat and a knit hat pulled low over her ears. She had her hands in her pockets, and she was looking at the depot the way someone looks at a place they have been before, with recognition and something close to sadness. "Hello," Miles said. The woman turned. Her face was stern, handsome in the way of women who have spent their lives outdoors. Her eyes were sharp. "You are Miles Carver," she said. It was not a question. "I am." I'm Dorothea Mercer. I run the Township Council and the Pennsylvania Heritage Preservation Fund. Miles walked toward her. The fund that gets this place if I fail to meet the terms of the will. That's right. She did not smile. I wanted to see what you were doing with it, whether you were serious about staying or whether you were just running out the clock until you could sell to Thomas Richter. I'm not selling. That's what everyone says, until the money gets too good to refuse. Miles stopped at the bottom of the platform steps. If you came here to convince me to leave, you are wasting your time. Dorothea looked at him for a long moment. Then she pulled a thermos from the canvas bag at her feet and unscrewed the cap. I brought coffee. Your father always offered me coffee when I came by. Seemed like the right thing to return the favor. She poured 2 cups and handed one to Miles. He took it surprised. The coffee was hot and strong and tasted like something made with care. You knew my father, Miles said. I did, for 30 years. I was on the Township Council when I was 23, fresh out of college, full of ideas about preserving rural heritage and protecting historical sites. I heard about the depot and I came out here to see it. Your father was sitting right where you are standing now, drinking coffee, watching the morning. He invited me in. We talked for 4 hours. He showed me the journal. He showed me the ticket booth. He told me about Harlan Boyer and the promise he had made to keep the station alive. By the time I left, I knew what I wanted to do with my life. She took a sip of coffee. Your father was the reason I started the Preservation Fund. He was the first person who made me understand that preserving a place is not about the building. It's about the people who believed in it enough to keep it standing when everyone else walked away. Miles looked down at the coffee in his hands. He never told me any of this. He never told you a lot of things. Dorothea's voice was quiet. But that does not mean they didn't matter. They stood in silence for a while, drinking the coffee, listening to the wind move through the trees. Thomas Richter came to see me, Miles said. He told me you are standing in the way of progress. Dorothea laughed. It was a hard sound, sharp-edged. Thomas Richter thinks progress is bulldozers and concrete and buildings that look like every other building in every other town. He doesn't understand that some things are worth keeping just because they have been kept. He doesn't understand that a place like this has value that cannot be measured in dollars. He said his offer expires at the end of the year. He said he would find another way to get what he wants. Dorothea's expression darkened. He is talking about eminent domain. The township has the legal authority to seize property for public use if the council votes to approve it. Richter has been lobbying the council for months. He has 3 votes already. He needs 4 to pass the motion. He is working on the 4th. Can he do that even if I meet the terms of the will? The will says you have to operate the station. It doesn't define what that means. If Richter can convince the council that you are not operating it in a way that serves the public interest, he can argue that the condition has not been met. And if the condition is not met, the property goes to the Preservation Fund. And if the fund does not have the resources to fight an eminent domain claim, which we don't, then the property goes to the township. And the township sells it to Richter. Miles felt something cold settle behind his ribs. So even if I stay, I could still lose it. Yes, unless you can prove that this place is serving the public, that it has value beyond nostalgia and sentiment, that it is alive, not just preserved. She finished her coffee and screwed the cap back on the thermos. Your father understood that. He kept this place alive by making it useful, by opening the door, by making coffee for anyone who walked by. It was not a museum. It was a station. Do you understand the difference? Miles nodded slowly. Dorothea picked up her bag. I did not come here to threaten you, Mr. Carver. I came here to tell you that if you are serious about keeping this place, you are going to have to fight for it. Not just against Richter, against the people in this township who think the past is something to be bulldozed and forgotten. Show them that your father was right. Show them that a station is more than just a building. She walked down the steps and started toward the road. Then she stopped and turned back. One more thing, your father left me a letter. He gave it to me 6 months before he died. He told me to give it to you if you stayed past December. He said if you made it that far, you would need to read it. She reached into her coat and pulled out a sealed envelope. She handed it to Miles. He believed in you, she said, even when you didn't believe in yourself. Then she walked away, her boots crunching in the snow, and Miles stood on the platform holding the envelope and watching her disappear into the trees. He did not open the envelope right away. He carried it inside and set it on the desk in the ticket booth beside the journal and the photograph of Sarah. He looked at it for a long time. His name was written on the front in his father's careful hand. Miles. He made himself wait. Maybe because opening it would make it real. Maybe because he was not ready to hear what his father had to say. Maybe because once he read it, there would be no more messages, no more words, no more chances to understand the man who had left him this place. Instead, he worked. He shoveled the snow from the platform and the path to the road. He split firewood until his arms ached. He cleaned the ticket booth, scrubbing the floor, wiping down the desk, polishing the bay window until the glass was clear enough to see through. And Dorothea's words, "A station is more than just a building." His father had kept the door open. He had made coffee. He had waited. Miles could do the same. That afternoon, he made a pot of coffee on the cook stove. He carried it to the ticket booth and set it on the desk beside a stack of tin cups he had found in the freight room. Then he propped the door open and went back outside and hung a sign on the platform railing. The sign was simple. He had made it from a piece of scrap wood and painted the letters in white. Coffee. Free. Come in. He did not know if anyone would come. The road was barely passable. The township was small. Most people had no reason to walk down an old rail bed to a forgotten depot in the middle of winter. But he hung the sign anyway, because that was what his father would have done. The first person came 2 days later. Miles was in the ticket booth reading the journal when he heard boots on the platform. He looked up. A man was standing in the doorway of the waiting room, snow on his shoulders, a pack on his back. He was young, maybe 30, with a scraggly beard and the kind of tired eyes that come from walking too far with no clear destination. The sign said coffee, the man said. It did. Miles stood up and walked to the cook stove. He poured a cup and handed it to the man. Help yourself. There is a bench if you want to sit. The man took the cup. His hands were shaking. You are not going to ask me what I'm doing out here. No. Most people ask. I'm not most people. The man sat down on the bench. He drank the coffee, slowly holding the cup with both hands, letting the warmth seep into his fingers. He did not say anything for a long time. Miles did not push. He just went back to the ticket booth and kept reading. After a while, the man spoke. I lost my job 3 months ago, lost my apartment, lost my girlfriend. I have been walking since November. Thought maybe if I kept moving, I would find something worth stopping for. Miles looked up. Did you? I don't know yet. The man finished the coffee and set the cup on the bench. But this is the first place anyone has let me sit without asking me to leave. He stood up and shouldered his pack. Thank you. You are welcome, Miles said. Door is always open if you need it. The man nodded and walked out. Miles watched him disappear down the rail bed, heading east toward wherever east led. His father sitting in the same room watching strangers come and go, offering coffee and warmth in the kind of quiet kindness that does not ask for anything in return. Miles understood now what Dorothea had meant. A station was not a museum. It was a threshold, a place where people stopped between where they had been and where they were going, a place where you could rest and warm yourself and remember that the world was not entirely indifferent to your suffering. His father had kept that threshold open for 66 years. Miles was going to do the same. More people came. A woman in her 60s hiking the old rail bed who sat on the bench for an hour and told Miles about her husband who had died 6 months ago and how she could not stand to be in their house anymore because every room reminded her of him. A teenager who had run away from home and was trying to get to Pittsburgh. Miles gave him coffee and a sandwich and $20 and told him to call his parents. The kid said he would. Miles did not know if he meant it. A retired railroad engineer named Paul, who had worked the Pittsburgh line in the 80s and had heard about the depot from Marcus Hayes. Paul brought a box of old photographs, pictures of trains that had run through Whitlock Junction before the line closed. He and Miles spent an afternoon going through them, identifying engines and cars, matching them to entries in his father's journal. Each person who came left something behind. Not money, though some of them tried. They left stories, pieces of themselves, proof that they had been there, that someone had listened. Miles started writing their names in the back of his father's journal. He did not write much, just the name, the date, and a single line to remember them by. December 10th, Paul Novak, brought photographs. Remembered the old line. December 12th, Jenny Callahan, lost her husband, learning to walk alone. December 15th, Aaron Diaz, running from something, heading towards something else. The journal was becoming his now. Not a replacement for his father's words, but a continuation, a way of keeping the promise alive. On the evening of December 18th, Miles finally opened the envelope Dorothea had given him. He sat at the desk in the ticket booth, with the kerosene lantern burning and the stoves crackling in the next room. He slid his finger under the flap and pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. The handwriting was his father's. The ink was recent. Miles, if you are reading this, you have stayed longer than I thought you would. That means something. It means you are starting to understand. I want to tell you about the day you were born. Your mother called me from the hospital. We had been separated for 2 years by then. She didn't have to call, but she did. She said, "You have a son. His name is Miles. He is healthy. He is beautiful. And I am not going to stop you from seeing him. But I am not going to make it easy either. You have to decide if you want to be his father. You have to decide if you are willing to do the work." I drove to Scranton that night. I stood outside the hospital for 3 hours. I wanted to go in. I wanted to see you. But I was terrified because I knew I was not the kind of man who could be a good father. I knew I drank too much. I knew I made promises I couldn't keep. I knew I had already failed your mother, and I was going to fail you too. So I left. I drove back here, and I told myself it was for the best, that you were better off without me, that you would have a better life if I stayed away. I was wrong. I should have walked through that door. I should have held you. I should have looked your mother in the eye and told her I was going to do the work even if I failed, even if I stumbled, even if I spent the rest of my life trying to be the man you needed me to be. I didn't, and I have regretted it every single day since. But here is what I learned, Miles. It is never too late. It is never too late to do the work. It is never too late to keep a promise, even if you broke it 100 times before. You have a daughter, Sarah. I know you haven't spoken to her in years. I know you think it is too late. I know you think she will never forgive you. But doors are meant to be walked through. Promises are meant to be kept. And daughters are meant to know that their fathers loved them even when they didn't know how to show it. Find her, Miles. Tell her you are sorry. Tell her you are trying. Tell her that you are learning to be the kind of man who keeps his promises. It won't fix everything. It might not fix anything, but it will be a start. And a start is all any of us ever get. I love you, son. I always did. I just ran out of time to prove it. Dad. Miles read the letter 3 times, then he folded it carefully and placed it beside the journal and the photograph of Sarah. He sat very still in the small booth, looking out through the bay window at the darkness beyond, at the snow falling again in slow white spirals at the world outside that had always felt too big and too cold and too indifferent to care whether he succeeded or failed. But the world was not indifferent. The depot was proof of that. Every person who had walked through the door was proof. Every cup of coffee, every story, every name written in the journal was proof that small acts of kindness mattered, that keeping a promise mattered. Miles pulled out his phone. The battery was at 18%. He had been charging it in the RV once a week, but he rarely used it. There was no signal at the depot. He would have to drive to Bedford if he wanted to make a call. But not tonight. Tonight he had something else to do. He opened the journal to a blank page near the end. He uncapped the pen his father had left on the desk, and he wrote, December 18th, 2024. I read the letter. I understand now. A station is a promise, and I am going to keep it. Tomorrow I am going to find Sarah. I am going to tell her I am sorry. I am going to tell her I am trying. I don't know if she will listen. I don't know if she will forgive me, but I am going to try because that is what you do when you love someone. You keep trying, even when it is hard, even when you are scared. You keep trying. Thank you, Dad, for teaching me that. I wish I had learned it sooner. He set the pen down. He closed the journal. He stood up and walked to the waiting room and fed both stoves until the fires roared and the room was warm enough to sleep in. Then he lay down on the bench and pulled the wool blanket over himself and closed his eyes. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, Miles Carver slept without dreaming. Morning came cold and clear. Miles woke at 5:30 the way he always did. He made coffee on the cook stove and carried a cup out to the platform. The snow had stopped during the night, and the world was white and still, and the sky was the color of brushed steel. He stood in the cold and drank the coffee and watched the light come up over the ridge the way his father had done for 66 years. And he made a decision. He was going to drive to Pittsburgh. He was going to find Sarah. He did not know how, but he would figure it out. He would start with the last address he had, the apartment she had lived in when she was 17. He would ask neighbors. He would search online. He would do whatever it took. But first he had to make sure the station was ready. He went inside and checked both stoves. He added wood, adjusted the dampers, made sure the fires would burn for hours. He made a fresh pot of coffee and set it on the cook stove with a stack of clean cups beside it. He left the door unlocked. Then he walked to the RV and spent 20 minutes digging it out of the snow. The engine turned over on the third try, coughing and sputtering, and he let it warm up while he went back inside to lock the ticket booth. He was putting on his coat when he heard the sound. A car engine coming up the dirt road, slow and careful tires crunching on snow and gravel. Miles walked to the window and looked out. A small sedan was pulling into the clearing. It was a Toyota, maybe 10 years old, with Pennsylvania plates and a dent in the front bumper. The car stopped beside the platform. The engine turned off. The driver's door opened. A woman got out. She was young, maybe 20, with red hair, pulled back in a ponytail, in a green winter coat, and jeans tucked into snow boots. She stood beside the car for a moment, looking at the depot, her breath visible in the cold air. Miles felt his heart stop. He knew that face. He had seen it every day for 12 years. He had watched it change from a baby to a toddler, to a child, to a young woman. He had carried a photograph of it in his wallet until the wallet wore out, and he transferred the photograph to a box and then to the desk in the ticket booth, where it sat now beside his father's journal. Sarah, his daughter. She was here. Miles walked to the door. His hands were shaking. He opened it and stepped out onto the platform. Sarah looked up. Their eyes met. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Sarah spoke. Her voice was quiet, careful, the voice of someone who has rehearsed what she is going to say but is not sure if she can actually say it. I saw the article, she said, in the Bedford Gazette, about the depot, about you, about Grandpa. Miles tried to speak. Nothing came out. Sarah looked away. I didn't know he died. I didn't know you were here. I didn't know about any of this until I saw the article last week. She turned back to him. Her eyes were hard guarded. I came because I wanted to see if it was true. If you were really here. If you were really trying to do something other than disappoint people. Miles found his voice. Sarah, don't. She held up her hand. Don't say you are sorry. Don't say you have changed. Don't say any of the things you are supposed to say. I didn't come here for that. Then why did you come? Sarah looked at the depot, at the sign he had hung on the platform, at the smoke rising from the chimney, at the fresh snow on the roof he had repaired. I came because I needed to know if you were capable of keeping a promise, any promise, even one you made to a dead man you never spoke to. She looked back at him. Are you? Miles felt the weight of the question settle over him like the snow. The past 5 weeks, the work he had done, the people he had welcomed, the fires he had kept burning, his father's journal, the 66 years of entries, the promises made and kept, the letter he had read last night. It is never too late. Yes, Miles said, I am. Sarah studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. Okay, then prove it. She walked past him and up the steps and through the door into the waiting room. Miles stood on the platform, his heart pounding, his breath coming fast. Then he followed her inside. Sarah was standing by the cook stove, her hands held out to the heat. She looked around the room, at the wooden bench, at the pot-bellied stove, at the ticket booth door. This is where Grandpa lived, she said, for 66 years. Why, because he made a promise and he kept it. Sarah turned to look at him. What kind of promise? Miles walked to the ticket booth. He picked up the journal and brought it to her. Read this. It will explain better than I can. Sarah took the journal. She opened it to the first page. She read the first entry, then the second, then the third. She did not stop reading for an hour. Miles made coffee. He sat on the bench and waited. He did not push. He did not speak. He just waited the way his father had waited, the way a station waits. Finally, Sarah closed the journal. She looked up at him. Her eyes were wet. He wrote about me, she said. He wrote about the day I was born. about standing outside the hospital, about how much he wanted to meet me. He never stopped wanting that. But he didn't come in. He left, just like you did. Miles felt the words land like a blow. I know. Why? Sarah's voice broke. Why do the men in this family keep walking away? Miles looked at his daughter, at the pain in her eyes, at the anger and the hurt and the desperate need to understand. And he told her the truth, because we are cowards, because we convince ourselves that people are better off without us, because it is easier to run than to stay and do the work and fail and try again, because we don't know how to love people without hurting them, and we think that walking away is the same thing as protecting them. He paused. But we are wrong. We have always been wrong. Sarah wiped her eyes. I didn't come here to forgive you. I know. I came because I needed to see if you had learned anything. If you were capable of being something other than the man who missed my wedding because he was too drunk to drive. Miles felt the shame of that day wash over him, again sharp and fresh as the moment had happened. I can't take that back. I can't fix it. All I can do is try to be better now. Are you? Sarah's voice was hard. Are you better? The question. The past 5 weeks, the work and the waiting and the promises kept. I'm trying, he said. That's all I can promise, that I'm trying. Sarah looked at him for a long time. Then she set the journal down on the bench. I'm married, she said. 3 years now. His name is David. We have a daughter, Emma. She is 2 years old. Miles felt something crack open inside his chest. A granddaughter. He had a granddaughter. I didn't invite you to the wedding, Sarah said. I didn't tell you about Emma because I didn't want you to be part of their lives. I didn't want them to know the man you were. I understand. But Emma asked about you last week. She saw a picture at my mom's house, an old picture of you and me when I was little. She asked who you were, and I didn't know what to tell her. Sarah's voice softened. I don't want to lie to her. I don't want to tell her that her grandfather is dead when he's not. But I also don't want to introduce her to someone who is going to disappear the first time things get hard. She looked at Miles. So I came here to see if you are still that man, or if you are becoming someone different. Miles did not answer right away. He walked to the ticket booth and picked up the photograph of Sarah, the one with the crayon sign. He brought it back and handed it to her. I have carried this with me every day for 6 years, he said. It's the last time you looked at me like I mattered. I kept it because I needed to remember that once a long time ago, I was the kind of man who deserved to be called the best dad ever. And I wanted to believe that maybe someday I could be that man again. He paused. I'm not there yet. I don't know if I ever will be. But I'm trying, and I'm not going to stop trying. Not this time. Sarah looked at the photograph. Her hand trembled. I need time, she said. I need to see if this is real. If you are really going to stay here and keep this promise, if you are really going to be someone I can trust. I understand. But I'm not going to disappear. I'm going to come back once a month to check on you to see how you are doing. And if you are still here, if you are still keeping the door open, if you are still trying, then maybe eventually I will bring Emma to meet you. Miles felt tears burning at the corners of his eyes. He did not try to stop them. Thank you, he said. Sarah stood up. She put on her coat. She walked to the door and stopped. Grandpa was wrong about one thing, she said. What's that? It's not too late. You just did it. Then she walked out, got in her car, and drove away. Miles stood on the platform and watched the car disappear down the dirt road. He stood there for a long time, listening to the silence, feeling the cold, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle over him like snow. Then he went inside. He sat down at the desk in the ticket booth. He opened the journal to the next blank page, and he wrote, December 19th, 2024. Sarah came. She read the journal. She is going to come back. I have been given a chance. I'm not going to waste it. This station is alive because people walk through the door, because promises are kept, because love, even broken love, can be repaired if you are willing to do the work. I am willing. Thank you, Dad, for showing me the way. I will not let you down. I will not let her down. Not this time. He set the pen down. He looked out through the bay window at the empty rail bed, at the snow on the trees, at the world that had once felt too cold and indifferent to care. But the world was not indifferent. His daughter had come. She had walked through the door, and she was going to come back. Miles Carver sat in the ticket booth at Whitlock Junction and allowed himself for the first time in 6 years to hope. The station was his now. The promise was his. The future was his. And he was not going to let it die, not ever.